Let's have a quick look at developing a slightly better looking prospective application. We'll throw some menus in there and we'll throw a little bit of navigation and put some reactive mobile templating around it so that we can change the size, hide the menus when the size of the application shrinks too small, make it much more mobile aware. So a great place to start is there's a skeleton project that you can download off Ignition's website, which gives you some basic menus and things. So let's fire up our designer and see if we can't make a slightly better looking UI. This will save me building the skeleton to illustrate the templates and navigation and alarming and so on. Save me from having to do it manually, make it a little bit quicker for you for the video. Let's say admin, use the appropriate password. Let's fire up our designer. Let us say new project. Let's call it CM101 perspective. User source default database, the one we provided earlier. Let's say parent project perspective. We're not going to make it inheritable, and we don't really care about the rest of those details for the time being. Excellent. Let's fire up our editing environment. Almost there. Very good. Okay, so we have some very basic stuff that we've inherited here. We have our home page, we have a page for alarms and for charts. So the charts page, alarms page, home page. There is a breakpoint, framework breakpoint heading, a menu page that's saved in the docs folder. All right, so let's have a quick look at those. Perspective, styles, okay, header. Let's override that and have a quick look at it. Let's open up our page title. Shared settings. It's under breakpoint. Use header page. Let's have a look. Okay, so that's our heading. We have a little menu button. And here's our layout visualization for changing these layout properties. These can also be edited by changing the grow, shrink, basis, and so on, these things. Okay, so interestingly here we have a bound display property, and it's visibility effectively for this little icon. I imagine that is because when the page is large enough, this disappears. When the page is small enough, it's displayed so that the menu down the side will be swapped effectively. This will be shown when the menu isn't, and when the menu is shown, this will disappear. Let's have a quick look at that menu. Docs, menu. Give this a moment to catch up. Override resources. Okay, so this is excellent, our menu for the left-hand side. So if we click on here, we click in our button collection, we can see there's a selection of items that are internal to this, this container. Each one of those items has got the target URL, child items, a nav icon for the parent label, and an icon that goes next to the label, and a show heading field. So let's have a very quick attempt at editing this. So we have currently 3 items. I would like to have another one here somewhere. So let's say insert. Okay, so we'll say target, and we'll give it the, actually, let's not do that for just one moment. Let's go a little further and say, under pages, we have in our system, we've got our instances of the 3 machines. So let's have a page for an overview of all of the machines and then an individual detail page. So let's go override resource. Let's say new folder and say machine. And then inside this machine, let's make a new view for all machines. Let's make this a flex layout. It doesn't need an individual URL because we're not going to pass parameters to it. Okay, so that's going to be our all machines page. We won't do anything useful with this for the time being except for throw a label on it so that we can identify it when we're trying to navigate. Label, text, all machines page. Let's save that. Okay, oops. So we also want to have a view. We are going to pass a parameter, so let's give this one a name. This also will be a flex layout. And let's call this individual machine. And it's got, okay, let's throw a label on that one. In fact, let's put 2 labels on this one. Label, and we're going to say this one is individual machine. And let's throw a second label on here. And give this machine number. So we're going to pass a parameter to this later when we turn this into a template for all the other pages, for all the instances of a machine. Okay, so now we've got a page for each one of those. Let's go back to our menu. Okay, so it would make sense to have, let's say we're going to put our master page in here. So let's say this is going to be target. So what's the format for the targets? Target slash charts slash alarms. Actually, we might make this one, the all machines page, have a let's delete that one for a sec. So machine, new view. We will give it a URL. We'll make it a flex. All machines. Okay. So it's going to be page, machine, all machines. All right, let's go back to our menu. This one is going to be page, machines, all machines. And instead of having this as an individual button, let's give it child elements as well. Well, let's give it a label first so it's a little bit clearer. Label all machines. And let's give this a relative icon path. You can check these icons out on Ignition's webpage. Label, icon, material, home. So it's going to be material dashboard, just because I know that's an icon. At least I believe that's an icon. It's available. We have some errors here we can check out later. No, I think it's spelled like this, but we can check on that later. Okay, so we want to add some items. We can add object, or we can add values, key value pairs, objects, or an array. So we will do this a little later. So for the time being, we're going to have an All Machines page. Let's fire up. If we hit the F10 key, we can see the page that we've created. So we have an All Machines menu, and we've gone Pages, Machines, All Machines, View Not Found. So the URL, the relative path, isn't correct there. Perspective, charts, alarms. So I think the page keyword is the problem here. Let's remove that. Let's go back to our menu and take this item and remove the page prefix. Save and hit F10 again. Machines, All Machine. Typically live demo world does not work the way I expected. Oh, I know what the problem is. This does not use the relative path, it uses the name we gave the page. Save. So if we go back to our config page here, it's actually All Machines. So it's /All Machines is the URL that's used in the single page application as opposed to the file path. So let's fire that up again. F10. Here we go. This should work this time. There we go, blank page because we recreated it without the element that we want on there. So let's say the All Machines page. Drag a label. Change the text. All Machines. Save. Go back to our browser. Hit F5. Oops, hit F5, not F6. All Machines. So now we have that page. So we could add in now child pages for the subsequent levels that we want. So let us have a quick look at doing that. The obvious thing to do here is if we start off with a simple overview machine template, we can then repeat that to show all of the machines in some kind of control. So let us start off with a new view and let's call it machine simple icon. And we'll make it a coordinate. It doesn't need an individual page, I don't believe. Okay, so this is a machine simple icon. Let's make our machine very simple indeed, and let's give it a label. Machine number. And let's say let's give our little machine a simple gauge for tank level. Let's create let's grab a label and say tank level. Can't spell level. Really can't spell. Let's put that there, and let's say unenabled and not enabled. We would like to see if it was enabled, obviously. It seems like a pretty sensible thing. Let's say a multi-state button. I don't like that. Too many states. Too hard to edit. Let's do this. Let's just do checkbox and say that it's enabled. Text enabled. Alright, let's just save that. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's save that. So in this case, we have one machine. So if we change The text in here, we can change that by hand, but of course we want to tie this to actual tags. So let's say we want the enabled bit of machine 1 comes from this position here. So we could actually say the enabled can be bound to a tag, and the tag is going to be either directly, indirectly, or expression generated tag. So let's say if we go tags, instances, machine 1 enabled, we would be able to do this. Now that's great if we wanted to make each one of these manually. We can copy this for a moment into our clipboard, and we can say that this is now tank 1. Let's say our value is going to be 0 to 100 stun angles. Yep, they look good. Let's say, tag, direct, machine 1, and this is going to be our tank level. So we could do this, and we could create machine number 1, and then we could open up the all machines window and place this inside here. A view cannot be nested in. That is not the view I meant to grab. I meant to grab this one. So we could, that is also not what I meant to do. All machines. We could then grab one of these and plonk on the page is the point I'm trying to make. We could embed those in the page. So let's go back to the all machines page. Let's place a container on there. We could put an embedded view, a repeater, but in this case let's say flex repeater. Let's make it quite large, and then let us say we want to add instances. We want to add our page, machine, simple machine icon. Okay, so we have one of these, and we could just keep adding instances. And this repeater will repeat in whatever setting we've set it up. In this case, it is a column repeater. We could set up a row repeater and so on and so forth. We could center them. We can wrap. There's many ways we can actually format this and make it look as good as we want. So this shows you how you can embed multiple versions of your effectively template. Now we want to parameterize those templates so that we can not have to hard code the values into them. So for the time being, we can delete this parent component, we can save this, and let's go to our simple machine. Now this time, instead of machine being hard coded, we'd like to have machine number tied to some parameter that we pass in. So it would make sense that for this page, we're going to need a custom property. Let's go back up one level and pass in a parameter. And it's going to be key machine number. And the value is going to be tied to something, but let's make it a 1 for the time being. Let's actually make it a 3 for the time being. So now we can take the text and we can say this is going to be based on an expression this time. So we could say the text is going to be machine number and then add the parameter machine number to the end of that string. So that's what that looks like. We might want to put a space there to make it look a little bit better. Okay, so that is the parameter now being passed in. So we can reuse the concept of that parameter and now tie this instead of to that value, we can make this an indirect tag. We can place an indirection label and we can tie this property to the parameter machine number. Apply, and now all of a sudden we have our indirect value coming through there. And let's do the same again for the property value. So we can now turn this into an indirect tag, replace that 1 with the position for an indirection, and let's pick the parameter machine number being passed in. And now all of a sudden we have a mechanism by which we can templatize our labels and our source for the data. So at this point, if we then add our let's say embedded view. Okay, so if we now pick a path to the object we wish to embed, a simple machine, and we're going to add a parameter. So we're going to pass a parameter, a value, and the key is going to be machine number, and value 1. And if I do it correctly, it will work, which I did not do. Machine simple icon. Machine number is being passed in. I made a typo, machine number 1. That's why it doesn't work. Okay, so we now have a container that allows us to drop individual machines on here. So if I were to now change out this embedded view container for an embedded carousel, for example, well, let's say flex repeater. Let's now pick a path to a page, machine, simple icon. So now we have each instance is going to need some information, including the parameter that's being passed to it. So now if we keep adding instances, we can now have a mechanism to put all of our instances on a page. So we need to now add a parameter that's passed into our instance to overwrite this number 3 to make our number 1, 2, 3 templated objects. So let's try that. So the way in which we pass a parameter into the flex repeater is by adding the parameters to the instances. So in this case, we can add a value, and the key for our value was machine name, machine number, sorry, and whoops, and a value of say 1. So if we then add the same thing, this can of course be scripted or copied and pasted when we create new ones, so we don't have to do it longhand every time. Number 2, value, machine number, and 3. So it's obvious here how we could change the order of the numbers on the template, for example, by changing the machine number parameter that's passed in. So this allows us to create nested objects. So now if we hit F10 and we put this on the correct window, we have our all machines window. So now if we want to have a quick look at how the mobile nature of the mobile aware nature of this style sheet system works, we can grab this, and if we make it small enough, the menu appears and disappears. So all of this happens relatively magically, so mobile applications work quite nicely. If you rotate them on the device, they scale. So now we're going to want to create child entries in the menu for each individual machine to pop up a detail page or to display a detail page. But for a quick moment, let's let's do that. Excellent. So we have our machine simple icon. Let's create a new view. Machine detail icon. Let's say coordinate based again. We don't really need a page URL for this one. Yeah, yes, let's make one anyway. So now we can save this. Let's go back to our menu. Now under all machines, which is our 1th element, we can have further items. An array called items. We have to manually do this, unfortunately. Let us say add an array element of an object. Object 0 has got a target, and that is going to be, let's just call that home for the moment. It's going to have another value called, it's going to have an object called label. It's going to have an object called label, and that is going to have a value called text. Let's see how this works for us. Press F10. Refresh our page. Excellent. So we have child menus. Obviously the target is not correct in that case. So we now have the ability to have a target, a label, text, and I assume we would like an icon as well. Label and an icon is another object. Okay, that is too much effort for the time being. Let's not bother with doing that. Let's delete this empty and duplicate. So we now have 3 child elements. If we save, refresh our page, we should now have 4 of these. Excellent. Now obviously we don't want them to all be called label, so let's call this machine 1. Machine 2. Machine 3. And this one will be machine 4, which obviously is not going to work as a dynamic link because there is no 4th machine. But let's do it anyway. I can now save that. Hit refresh. Click on all machines, and now we have all our machines. In order to pass parameters into pages, the URL needs to have a suffix attached to it. And in this case, for our detailed icon, suffix looks like this, a slash and a colon, and then the name of the variable that's being passed in, name of the parameter. Machine number. Okay, so we hit save on that. So if we look at the passing parameters, URL parameters section of the Ignition documentation, you'll see here the path. Sorry, that's not a great idea. And the internet's not working because we've had a power failure. Okay, never mind. The /: and the name of the parameter that you're passing is documented in there and how that works. So now if we go back to our menu, we go to the number 1th element, we look at its navigation items, and we change the target URL to contain not a parameter like that, like we did with the previous example, but like this, which is much more like the way that we would do it with an ORM in a single page application in, say, Java or something like that, something web-based. This is much more familiar. So if we now go along and we take each one of these and we add the correct suffix for the page in question, copy page 3 or the 3rd one, and this one obviously is not going to work because we only have 3 machines. So if we now save that, we should be able to go back to our perspective page, reload it, and we now have dynamic content on each of the child pages. So that's how you pass parameters to pages via their URL. So if we go back to our detailed page, we can now see view parameters machine number. This machine number parameter being passed in. So we can pass in, out, or in both directions. So in this case, obviously, we're passing data into the page. So in this case, we could then go along and create a page with a whole bunch of information on it. Cylindrical tank for tank level. We could say its value. I don't know what its capacity is. Let's say, I think the maximum capacity in my simulation is something like this. Let's link our value to a tag, and it's an indirect tag. It is going to be a tag from our simulated device. Initially, let's call it tank level, and this is pointing to the tank level for machine 1. We're going to replace that with a marker for our indirection reference, and we're going to tie that to the parameter that we passed in machine number, which in this case, if we're passing in a number that's valid, we will then have a tag path that is valid, and we shall have a machine number that works. Okay, so we've got a tank level, and so we want to have an LED display, and we're going to link this value to an indirect tag, and we're going to bring that tag, in, I'll say paint code, and again, we'll replace the hard link with an indirection and point it to the parameters that are being passed to this page. We can, of course, copy this and paste it into the subsequent object if we wanted to. It would make some sense to have a so we can also do things to do with how we wish the formatting to work on this. We can actually pick predefined formats, or we can edit our own and change things like vertical spacing, for example. So we can have text justification, inner word, outer word, so on. can change those things. But in this case, we're going to change this from a linked value. I'm going to delete the binding, remove bindings, and we're going to just hard code that to paint code. It was paint code, wasn't it? Yes, paint code. Okay, so let's duplicate this and point this one to, instead of paint code, to the part number. Oops, system, machine 1, production item code. And again, we'll replace that direct link with an indirection. And we'll point it to the parameters for the page. So that one is the paint code. This one is the part code. Part code. Obviously, if the machine is running, actually let's not use that one, let's use a toggle switch. Text, running, and let's tie this to the enabled tag, indirect tag, tags, machine 1, enabled, and then let's supply that indirection. Now here we've wanted to have this disabled, or if we wanted this to be bidirectional for control, if we could write to the I/O server, we could easily tick these things. We can also configure tag history and things on this binding. So if we now save that, that can be our detail page. Let's go back to our HMI, and our paint code has got too many digits, so let's go back to the designer, change the format, number format. We do not want decimal places. Hit save, go back to this page, wait for it to refresh. There we go. Paint code, part code, running, not running. No, our tank level doesn't appear to be working. Let's have a look. Capacity, value, null, tank level, machine number. Okay, all of this looks okay. Bad not found. Okay, let's rebuild this in case we made a spelling mistake. Tags, instances, tank level. We may have made a mistake in binding that tag. Mistakes are to be expected occasionally. Okay, apply, save. This is quite slow to save, takes a couple of seconds. Machine 1 still has no value, 1%, 0%. Aha, I suspect my numbers are too small. So let's have a quick look and see what numbers we actually have for tank level. And tank level may be in percentage rather than volume. Let's go back to our designer. Pressure, tank level. Okay, so it's a floating point value, and now I recall it's a percentage. Let's edit our capacity, 0 to 100. Let's set a threshold warning and say 75%. Let's go back to our page. Number 4 obviously doesn't exist. There we go, much better. And of course we can go back and let's create our overview page that shows all of the different machines in their small versions. So we have the All Machines page, and it looks like this. Now all we need is a menu item for all machines. So let's go back to our menu, click on the All Machines. It is the second element. There is an All Machines target. And it's incorrectly labeled because All Machines is the name of the page, not the absolute path of it. So if we go back to this config, this main page, we'll see /all machines is actually the page machines, all machines. So now, because we've changed that to the correct unit, we should be able to click. Okay, so clicking on the child pulls up the menu. So we in fact need a separate option for the all machines. It's not the end of the world. Let us go back to our menu for a moment. Let's duplicate the second last one. And instead of having 2 charts options, let's have all machines. Okay, we'll change the navigation icon as well in a moment. Let's go back to our initial page, home. Now we have 2 labeled charts because I've forgotten to relabel it. Label. Machine. Overview. Okay, so now I have a machine overview, which shows us all of the machines, and we can see the individual machines by drilling into here. 92% is above the 90% error range that we set, hence the change in color. All of these graphics are customizable. Okay, so there's a home icon, a chart icon, and an alarm icon. Let us connect to the Borg network quickly and have a look for ignition perspective icons. And there is a list of the icon component path somewhere, which I should be able to find you. Here we go, material icons. This gives you the baseline resources used for standard icons. So if we wanted to take, say, this is the alarm icon that or the bell icon we had before, is called something, I don't know what it's called, but we do have alarms. We have a chart icon. So we have CH somewhere. We can start with alarming. So alarms are based on tag properties. So tag configuration is where alarms are effectively configured. We don't have to configure separate tags for alarming or move tags from, or copy and paste tags from our IO configuration into a subset that are alarmed. We can actually configure the tags. In our case, because we created a UDT, we can actually edit the UDT directly, and doing so will allow us to do things like have units, tooltips, alarms. So we're going to historize the fact that the enabled bit has turned on and off. So we're going to turn that to true. There are no alarms configured for the enabled bit, but we can also add one of those. We can say we want a new alarm, and we're going to say the alarm is enabled, priority is low, shelving settings. So the mode is equal to false. I believe false is the correct value for enabled true false, as opposed to 1 and 0 or similar. Okay, so now we can see there's traits. We have the clock symbol for history and the alarm symbol for alarming. So if we now save that, those properties are now inherited by our instances. So if we drill into an instance, we can see that under enabled, if I pull up the properties, this little dot indicates they're inherited. If we were to change it, the dot changes color, but the enabled bit now has a history and alarming properties, which are configured at the UDT level. They can be overwritten or they can be inherited from the parent product. So they don't have to be identical for everything, but for ease of use, they can be if you wish them to be. So in this case, we're going to say turning that bit on and off causes an alarm. We have an alarm page. If the alarm is on, well, let's configure some more alarms. Let's say if pressure is from 0 to 100, let's say if the pressure goes over 70%, we want to alarm as well. So in our UDT, we're going to edit directly into the pressure. We're going to say we have alarms configured. We're going to create a new alarm, and we're going to say, we'll give this a proper name, high pressure. In fact, I don't like that abbreviation, high pressure. It's enabled. Let's give it a medium priority. Label, high machine pressure. This can be manual acknowledgement, auto acknowledged, notes, acknowledgement notes required, shelving allowed. So this is going to be above set point. The set point is going to be 75%, inclusive of that value. If true, the alarm will be evaluated every time it's above that value and there's a change. We only care the first time it goes over the change, so we'll set that to false. We can now apply that. So we should have two kinds of alarms now. So if we save this project, those changes, so the UDTs will be inherited by all of the instances. We can go back to our prospective page and have a look at alarms. So now we can see medium priority, low priority alarms. So these low priority alarms are going to be when the machine was enabled, the enabled alarm. This is the high pressure alarm. There's a name, there's a display path. Everything can be filtered on these. They can be shelved and so on. We can actually drill into them and see details about them. We can acknowledge them. We can see their details, and properties and things. We can also acknowledge if we have the correct permissions and shelve those alarms and so on. This alarm mechanism is quite configurable and ties into the user notification system, SMS gateway, voice gateway, email, alarm escalation chains, and so on. It works quite well. What we don't have are any active charts. So we have this chart that was created, pressure and temperature. These are just hard-coded values. So let's edit this chart. Playing with the chart should be relatively simple. We find in the menu, the second last item points to the charts page. So let's go to our main page, go to charts, and that is the page/charts view itself. So we'll go page, charts. This is light gray because it's still inherited from the parent project. So we'll override the parent project version and we wish to change it. So let's have a quick look. We've got a series added to the chart. This is called boiler and it has some data points. We have a single plot, titles, tick counts, time range, and so on. All of these things are bindable to either hard-coded properties, database properties, various other things. So let's delete the existing chart because we want to create our own. Really delete component. Yes, I think we will. Let's go and say simple, well, let's go time series chart, which was what we had on there before. So we have these data points. So we need to bind our data, our series data, to some historical data. This binding is a little bit more complicated because we actually need to bind to historical data, which we can get from tag history rather than directly from a tag. Although we could, if it was a short time series tag, like a sparkline, we could actually monitor the tag all the time the client is open or the runtime is open. The values are cached, and that sparkline would be read and aggregated directly from the I/O and wouldn't need a history backing behind it. But generally speaking, you would use tag history via the historian. In order to create a chart, we need some values that we're going to log historically. So we have a tank level, and this is configured with a sample mode for on change, a historical deadband, minimum time between samples, and so on. Let's change this to periodic. Time between samples, 5 seconds, just to make this a little bit faster changing for our application for a bit more resolution. So we have history turned on for tank level. We can save that. And now we're going to grab a time series chart, put on our chart page, fill the page up just because it's what I'd like to do. Let's take our existing time series and create a M1 pressure. Oops. M1 pressure and data. Oopsies. Okay, so we're not going to use this static data that was pre-generated for us. What we are going to do is bind to some data, and it's going to be tag history data this time. And query mode, let's leave point count 100 points, real time, say historical, and that's going to be the last hour. Now is the current time minus 1 hour. We could change that to minus seconds and so on and so forth with the scripting language. It's going to be a direct path in this case. Let's go to our tags, an instance of machine 1, and say tank level. Apply. Okay, we have a tank level, and this level indicates, this step change indicates when we turned the history on from 0 up to the current value. So we have series M1 pressure, machine 1 pressure. Let us duplicate this 2 more times. Let's change this. Oops, it's auto added a number to the end of them, which can be quite useful. But in our application, we're not going to do that. We're going to change like this. M1, 2, and 3. Let's bind again to tag history. And of course, this can be scripted and made much faster. Historical data, tags, instances, machine 2, tank level. So we should now have 2 lines on here. Again, let's try this. Historical, last hour, tags, instances, machine 3, sorry. Tank level, apply. So we should have 3 different lines. We can obviously give these different colors and bind them in different ways to give us more useful information. Hit the save button. Let's go back to our SCADA, our HTML5 compliant mobile aware SCADA system. Let's go to charts, and we now have 3 different axes, which are auto scaling, and we have our 3 different tank levels. We can grab and scroll, and we can perform various actions. So we can change this chart around and put 3 different pens on on one axis, for example. We could use different types of chart. So if we were to delete two of these time series and then go back to here, and instead of making this M1 pressure, we could just say pressure. Oops, we could just say pressure, and we could bind 3 different tags. So we could add an extra one, instances, machine 2, tank level, tank number 3, apply, 4 columns. I'm not sure exactly how this works, but we'll have a quick look. Let's refresh our page, go to charts, and we only have tank level coming in as a single element. So obviously some configurations required here. We may not have to do it quite like this. We may have to change this 4 columns somehow. I'm not 100% on how we do this. M1, M2. I haven't played with this charting in perspective a great deal. There we go. That's better. Different aliases for them, so they're not all called the same thing. And now if we go back to our home page, refresh, charts. Okay, so now we have M1 and M2 and one called tank level, because I forgot to rename the third one. So you get the point anyway. The values are the same for 2 of them because they're auto-generated by the OPC server simulator. Let's go back into here just for the sake of it and change this to M3. M3. Apply. Okay. Save. Now I believe this saving action will actually auto-refresh the page itself for all the clients. If we wait just a second, we should see that. There we go. So that also means that if you've got kiosk mode or display clients that are on overhead screens without keyboards and so on, this rolling out still works. So we still have the incorrect labels, however. That's very interesting. Did I not save that? No, evidently I did not hit the apply button. M3. Click out of the box, hit apply, hit OK. Save. This should refresh on its own. And we should find ourselves now with M1, 2, and 3. Obviously, the alarming and the deadbanding and the way that the data is stored in the historian and querying the historian directly, for example, are configurable. So the final thing that I think we should have a quick look at is pulling some data directly from SQL Server into a data grid onto one of these pages. In order to do this, we're going to generate a new page called Data from SQL, and it's also a page with a view. So if we go back here to our main configuration gear wheel thingy, we have data from SQL. That's a view in its own right. It's got a page configuration with a URL, and it's just an empty page at this point. If we open that up, data from SQL, just a blank page. So one of the advantages of Ignition is that it understands multiple databases, both for its history and for alarming, but also natively understands the connection to Oracle, MariaDB, Microsoft SQL Server, and a whole variety of other servers, Postgres, MySQL. So we can actually pull data from and write data to those kinds of databases very, very simply, either using named queries, so predefined equivalent of, say, stored procedures in the database side of things. We can create our own SCADA-based stored procedure type functionality with named queries, or we can query directly, or we can write script in Python and the native scripting language that will directly access using system level drivers, those data sources, or we could write our own database from scratch using whatever mechanism we wanted. We could even write custom drivers to talk to bespoke equipment in those scripting languages. But in this case, we're going to try 2 different things. We're going to firstly poll a database from a direct query, and then the second option is going to be we're going to create a named query and tie that to the equivalent of a data grid. So I will start off by creating a background database quickly, or finding one on my system that already exists, and then we'll go from there. So our database looks roughly like this. We have a database named training. It has a bunch of tables in it. One of them is called the item table, and items have an ID, a name, description, and a price. Let's go straight back to Ignition and have a quick look at how we might accomplish talking directly to the database. So we're going to need some kind of data grid. So let's have a flick through and see what we've got. Date time picker. All right, well, let's start even simpler than that. Let us go straight for a label. Let's expand this out. And let's bind this to something. So straight away we can bind to a whole bunch of stuff, including queries. So we can have a query here, and the query binding path can be set to a named query. And there are parameters we can pass. So we can return JSON, a data set, scalar values, and so on. So let's leave that as auto for the moment. And let's create our named query. Okay, let's named query, named queries, new query. Let's call it get items. Okay, so it's going to be enabled, belongs to a security zone with a description, there's some caching. So let's go straight to authoring. We can either use our browser on the side here, table browser, or we can do some other fancy stuff, but I think what we would like to do in this case is actually let's take a table and let's make a table inside our existing database, so the Ignition 803 database, rather than try and connect to an external one. Oh, actually no, let's connect to an external one entirely for the sake of thoroughness. So let's open our local host. Let's create a whole new database connection. Databases, connections. So that's our Microsoft SQL Server connection that we're using for all the rest of our Ignition functionality. This too is going to be a Microsoft SQL Server. It does sit at localhost, and it is called SQL Express. The username is SA, password. And the database is not called test, it is called training. So we're going to create that database. And let's give it a better name than new connection. This is training DB. Save changes. Let's go straight back into our editing environment. Refresh our database connections. We have training DB. We have customers, orders, and so on. These are parameters that are going to be passed into the query string. For this very moment, we are not going to use those. We're going to say we want to see items. We want to see item ID. Okay, so we can drag and drop our parameters to make things a little bit easier. We have a query builder, which is somewhat visual, a little bit like the one in Microsoft SQL servers, a visual builder for querying. But in this case, we're going to say select ID, name, description, and price from item. And I believe that should come close to working for us, depending on how it wants the structure of the query, whether it wants to have the database.dbo syntax, or whether it's like this, I think we should be okay. So we can go, we don't want to use any parameters. We want to limit the sample size to 100. We want to execute the query. Bang, we have our data. So straight up, we can access this data relatively easily from our prospective images that we and pages that we've created. So we can close this builder, go back to our prospective pages. We give this a moment to catch up. Pushing to the server. Let's go back to our views. Let's move this in. Let's drag this into the pages to make that a little bit neater. Let's open this page back up. And now we want to bind to our data source. So let's pick a named query, select that, apply. All of a sudden we've got all our data accessible to the page itself. So in this case, if we look at that, that looks very suspiciously like some JSON data. So we can actually tell the query in the binding that we don't want JSON data. We want to consider this as a scalar value. So it shows us what the actual query contains. Or we could generate our own query from scratch. So I think what we could do here is turn this into a scalar query that's not returning some JSON data. So let's go back and have a look at our named queries, get items. So let's go back to the authoring section and say, we would like to see the max price from items. Let's test that. So we would expect to see here item 1 as being the one that's returned, maximum price. Excellent, so that's a scalar value, although that's probably not a fantastic example. It will do for the moment. So we can go back to our data from SQL page. Let's go back to this binding, get items. So this is not going to return JSON data anymore. It's actually a scalar value. And in this case, it's returning a 1, which is not what I would expect. But let's go back to our main page, refresh. And we still do not have on our home page a menu item for this. So let's go back and add a menu item. Let's go menu, click on the menu itself. We're going to add, duplicate an item very similar to this underneath, make it number 5. It is going to be data from SQL. And we definitely don't want it with an alarm icon. That would be very silly. In fact, let's just remove the icon altogether for the time being. Machine overview is the third item, label, icon. I believe this leading slash may be part of our problem for the icons not working. There we go. So this one we don't want to call alarms. We want to give it a better name and say database. Okay, so we can now save that, go back to our main page. And now we have a database section. So we are pointing at the prospective data from SQL link, and that is not working perfectly. So let's go back to this. Data from SQL is the name of the page. Let's just put that in the clipboard, make sure I've entered it correctly. Let's go back to the menu. Last element. Put the target in there. Text, icon, and so on and so forth. Excellent, data from SQL, data from SQL. I believe that should work now. Go back to our main page, refresh. View not found. View with configured path not found in project. So we can see actually the alarms section is now working. And we can still see all of the rest of our stuff. Prospective data from SQL. So we've clearly got a little error here somewhere. This page does look correct. That's the page URL. And the page itself is called data from SQL. The fact that it's not inside, that it says it's not inside the page folder is a little bit concerning. Let's destroy this. Because I dragged and dropped it, I think something strange has happened here. Let's go page, new view, create a page with URL, data from SQL. And let's assume that now, because I've created it in the correct spot, instead of dragging and dropping it, URL already in use. That's not going to help us much now, is it? Go back to this page and delete this one. Delete this page configuration altogether. All right, now let's create new page. Data from SQL. Don't care if it's coordinate. Create that page view. That will now create data from SQL from that. So we now have a value here that looks correct. So I believe that will now work, even though we've just made an empty page and there's nothing on it. We should get rid of this error. So if we refresh this, database, so we now have the blank page rather than the error. So now if we open this page and we add a text field of some description, say a label, this label could be many lines or multi-line or so on. Let's bind that to the query. Let's select, no parameters. I wonder if we can actually do star from items. Nope, we can't do that. That'd be a bit too much to hope for, wouldn't it? So let's do our get items query. We can set this to be run on startup or on page display or polling or whatever we like. So this would obviously poll every 30 seconds and update that value if the query returned a different value. So of course, there's our value in JSON format. So if we say we want to hard code that to a scalar value, we can return that value. So we can bind values to display elements, both from SQL and from I/O data and from things like RESTful API endpoints and things quite simply. So this makes an excellent tool to integrate diverse systems, PLCs, SCADA type products, databases, web APIs, and this particular product, Ignition Perspective, because it's mobile aware and it's designed for mobile applications, can also access the hardware on your mobile devices. So accelerometers, cameras, and the various other features like barometric pressure, temperature, GPS, things like that, that are built into your mobile phone. So you can use your phone's camera to interact with this software, for example. So this makes a compelling argument for not writing a web-based UI for a particular application and a separate SCADA application. Using this, you can have the best of both worlds. You can talk to your RESTful API endpoints, for example, doing MES operations against an API server, and bind that data directly to the controls in your HMI that is mobile device aware, HTML5 compliant, allows resizing, rotation, routes nicely over the internet, and talk directly to PLC I/O without having to use additional software suites or middleware. So this set of features makes this a compelling argument, and at a price point of some sort of $8,500 for this functionality, assuming one's talking to an Allen Bradley PLC, another $350, $400 for a Siemens driver. This gives you a level of functionality that, whilst the license might be more expensive than, say, InTouch standalone at approximately $5,000 or $6,000, if you have to write an InTouch application and then embed some HTML code in it to access API endpoints, or you have to then put web-based content inside of your InTouch application or write middleware to do that, engineering costs money. If you can do it directly in this software and it costs you the equivalent of 2 days worth of man hours in licensing fees, it's a very large win for 2 days worth of engineering hours, you can have all of this stuff embedded in one place. You can manage it from one place, you can edit it in one place, multiple editing environments, version control, all of this stuff ties together really, really elegantly and gives you a one-stop solution with a much more professional outcome at a very, very low engineering cost. So it's very, very much worth considering as a single piece solution.